Today we're going to be talking about spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is one of the most evidence-based and reliable techniques to improve memory retention. So first of all, we're going to start by establishing something called the forgetting curve. This is when you have a fact, an idea, a thought, a memory, and right when it happens, right when you think about it, it's obviously quite so fresh. You typically don't forget it. But as time goes on, you remember it less and less. According to this type of curve, this is like a 1/x curve basically. So as you go farther out from this point, the retention of this, fact, memory, its details, etc., degrade over time. And so the this forgetting curve is typically true of all types of memories, thoughts, facts, etc. And there's notice a steep decline right at the beginning, and then a much slower decline later. So between days 6 and 7, you don't forget as much as you do between days 1 and 2. This makes sense, like kind of intuitively and whatnot. So I don't think I have to convince anyone too much of this idea. There's obviously lots of other factors that lead into making something memorable. We can definitely go into that in another video. One of my favorite topics. There's an amazing book called Moonwalking with Einstein. It's actually not an amazing book, but it's like an okay book that I think is one of the only ones in this field that has like kind of a little bit more of an engaging storyline, etc. About somebody who tried going through the world memory competitions, world memory championships, etc. And it's kind of that little like deep dive into like a community of nerds, which I always am. I love that shit anyways. So I would recommend looking at it and whatnot, but it's really, it's quite long. And so I'm going to kind of summarize some of those ideas here. But we can talk about things that help you remember, mnemonics, environmental cues, different types of practice, etc. But right now we're going to talk about spaced repetition. So the idea is that you want to essentially review and repeat this memory at different intervals. Because you're forgetting so quickly at the beginning, you want to review this idea relatively quickly. So an hour after this thing happens, or let's say 5 minutes after it happens, remember it. And then an hour later, then 3 hours later, then 12 hours later, then, a day, 2 days, 5 days, etc. And so you have this kind of spaced pattern where you repeat and review this idea. And when you do that, when you kind of so here's our forgetting curve. When you do kind of do a review, you remember again. And so then you'll start forgetting again and again and again. And each time you remember and recall this thing, the forgetting becomes slower. You retain it better. So there's a lot of great graphics on this. If you check the link in the description, because I can do that. Check the link in the description for the forgetting curve stuff, blah, blah. So anyways, spaced repetition is one of those techniques that you use to recall a specific fact so that it is more retainable. There's a lot of apps that will do this if you're talking about like factotums, right? Like flashcard apps will use spaced repetition. Oftentimes when there are things that I need to remember, I will send myself an email with it and then snooze it for like 3 hours, 1 day, 7 days, 10 days later. And then once I see the email, I'll do like a quick test. I'll like make sure that you can't see the bit of data that I want in the subject line. And so then I'll just like recall it and then snooze it again. So that's a really nice way. It takes almost no effort. It's built into your workflow already because you check your email relatively, regularly. It takes 1 second to swipe something away. And I do that for things that are kind of like important-ish. So for example, there's certain codes like backup codes or things for like account recoveries that you'll almost never need to use, but that that it's good to have on hand. Sometimes in your wallet or whatever, but sometimes you don't have it. So for example, I lost my phone in Lisbon one day in between a connecting flight and got totally stuck, and I needed to do a bunch of things to like secure my accounts and get new flights and all this junk, right? And so luckily, because I had used this technique of remembering my Google recovery backup code with spaced repetition over, X months or years, I had it right there. In fact, I'm just literally saying it over and over again in my head. That code's already used and it's useless, but still, I had this backup code in my head. And so that's really great for numbers that are meaningful for a long period of time. Let's say you can't remember your social or something, maybe a bank account number, recovery codes, other people's phone numbers for emergency uses, drop them into an email, do the snooze thing, and do, kind of a spaced interval pattern, 3 hours, 6 hours, 1 day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, a month, etc. And really the interval, that pattern, that spacing is semi-important. So, you can go find that online, but it's also not critical at all. If you do 1 hour versus 2, it's not a big deal. What is way more important is free recall. So oftentimes people will think rereading something is the best way to kind of retain it and relearn it. But that's actually not true. The best way to actually remember something is to go through the process of free retrieval, which is just to sit there and be like, all right, let me think about what happened that day or what the code was. And you have to use that kind of that little search feature in your brain to come up with the thing that you're recalling, right? And so for example, places will ask you to do this to help with learning. Duolingo, I think, has a suggestion where they say, at the end of every session, take a moment and write down all the things you can remember from the lesson, because that will actually train you to remember the things much more than actually redoing the lesson. So free recall is one of the best, actually, I think it is, according to the studies that I've read, the best way to improve retention. So, use free recall all the time. Personally, what I like to do at the end of every day, I use free recall to remember all the things that happened that day and write them down. And that helps me kind of just make my days stay with me, which I kind of want, because I like those days and I like kind of remembering them and reliving them and having those memories with me. So free recall is honestly one of the most important techniques that I use to actually remember my life, as well as all bits of data. And so that pattern kind of works for me as by doing a recap at the end of the day and remembering those events, oftentimes, before I go to sleep or whatever, and then doing a weekly review where I remember the events of the day. So I'll sit down in my weekly review and be like, what happened this week that I really liked, and spend free recall doing it. And, I had planned once upon a time to do monthly and yearly reviews, but I don't really. But those would also be great ways of just remembering these things. So free recall, spaced repetition, these are 2 of the best ways to remember things. These are meta-learning ideas. These are evidence-based. These are psychology-based. One of the most important things you can do is learn how to learn, because once you do that, everything else becomes so much easier. And so I'm going to stop there. This is a precursor to our learning series, which, there'll be more videos about. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you got something out of this video. Goodbye.